You're listening to Cultivate, a podcast of the Evergreen Association.
Um, Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Cultivate. This is the podcast of the Evergreen Association, and we go into all kinds of things related to ministry life. Today, I'm really excited to have our guest here today is Reverend Morgan Fletcher. And I met Reverend Morgan Fletcher when she was serving in ministry as an associate pastor, but now she is serving in a very multifaceted, free-range, independent um, ministry work of her own. And I want her to kind of introduce this for us because that's going to be very interesting for our conversation going forward. So without further ado, Reverend Morgan, I would love for people to know more about you. You're such an interesting person. So could you tell our listeners and viewers something about yourself and the ministry that you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sam. As Sam noted, I had worked at Calvary Baptist Church of Denver for 10 years. And in January of last year, shared that it would be my last season with the congregation as I started Present Nomads. So Present Nomads is a business that hopefully will allow pastors to be in the pastorate longer through free range pastoring, meaning I can do behind the scenes pastoring work. If you are preparing for a sabbatical or a leave of sorts and you happen to be in the metro area of Denver, I could maybe help you out front, but really the free range pastoring I want to be able to do is behind the scenes. How can I take off some of the pastoral, administrative, creative responsibilities when a congregation's going through a strategic envisioning process or changing, or maybe you're a congregation that's just smaller in size and can't afford an associate, but need an associate to kind of help with curriculum or planning or just having a conversation partner. So that's the free range pastoring side. I also do coaching. So for me, intuitive coaching is we all have that intuitive wisdom, the divine dwelling within us. And as we grow, it often gets interrupted, that ability to tap into the wisdom and know what allows us to be well. And so my coaching is around how to help with that. And then I also help with a bit of consulting when it comes to pastoral practice. Oftentimes we'll get new ideas and want to go about it, but we don't really check in with what needs to change so that the pastors and staff can be well as this new ministry or vision comes to life. So those are my areas of focus. And then most recently, I'm also a master, have my master's of social work and just completed my licensed clinical social work exam. And here in Colorado, we'll be seeing clients to just help with their collective well-being. And so ministry has shifted, and Present Nomads is where I do that now.
Mm. Thank you. And what I love about this when I had some conversations with you is you're a very multi-talented person. So you're doing all these different things, but I saw that there was like this really special thread through all of it, even though you're expressing yourself in these different ways through Present Nomads. And that theme of like wellness,
Mhm.
thriving and abundance seemed to come up a lot. And I was just wondering, what was your connection maybe to this desire to impart wellness and thriving to others?
Yeah. For so long, a lot of my journey was focused on healing and getting to a place of status quo. And I
Mm,
thought that was like the journey. And then at Calvary, actually, last program year, our theme was It Is Well, meaning it is well, even when everything else is not. How do we remain well? And that taught me, especially when we look at the scriptures of Jesus talking about abundant life, that it's not about material abundance or anything along those lines, but well-being and an abundance of well-being. And so all the work at Present Nomads is in hopes to help people thrive and be well. Sometimes we don't know what it takes for us to be well. And so that's where coaching or therapy could come in. Other times this is too much work for anyone in any season. And I want to be well, so we're going to contract out.
yeah.
But the hope ultimately is that all of us begin to acknowledge that we weren't created just to survive,
Mhm.
but that there is something unique for each and every one of us to offer the gospel, to offer our communities, to offer ourselves that comes from a place of our own well-being. And as pastors and as ministers, we often forget that we're a part of that healing, of that cultivation of goodness, um, because we were taught sacrificial servant leadership. And so for me, the chance to offer breath and space for people to be well is ultimately embodying one of my values, which is we can't do this alone. And that well-being is going to look different for every season of life. And so figuring out how to adjust and pay attention to self and community and family and friends is part of it. And so for me, that's how I was in a really good spot with Calvary Denver. And I think it was because I was in a good spot relationally that I was able to say that the rhythms of the pastorate there did not allow me to be well as a mom of two little tiny humans and a wife and a community member. But then I started to add myself into that. It wasn't good for me in this season. Um, and I think that is a reframing, because so often pastors and ministers get to a place of, I'm good, I've got it all. If I let one thing go, it's all going to fall. So I'm just going to keep on going because we know what to expect with keeping going. But often it's at the expense of our own well-being.
Right. There's so much good wisdom here that I hope our listeners are keying into what you're saying. And, you've been a local church pastor for a very long season, and, so have I. And isn't it true, like the way the church is designed, it's like an overwhelming culture, right? Like you get this
Yeah.
thing of like Sunday's always coming, crisis like week to week. And then
Yeah.
I was just sharing with the church about like if you just stay on this one track of the week to week, the immediate, something's always there. But then while you're doing that, in parallel, you also have to be thinking about long term, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
strategy, visioning, like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, um, but the way that it's so overwhelming, like all you can do is just like survive and get through.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but wonder, especially like North American Christian culture, we're giving this messaging of like, this is life with God, like you were saying about just survive, get through it,
Yeah.
um, get the status quo, just don't look too bad, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about things like wellness and thriving, like you are so well, it almost feels like a luxury or something
For sure.
oh, I don't deserve to do that. Um,
Yeah.
how do you think we should like kind of address this whole culture of survival and
Yeah.
survive the overwhelm, if you will?
Yeah.
Like, what are
That's a
some
good
things that
phrase.
you think uh to
Yeah.
that?
I would say, one of the things that the reason I think it comes across as a luxury is because of the wellness industry,
Yeah.
right? Like, buy these products, buy this new whatever. And so there is a commodification that has come with the wellness industry. And I think it also comes from a place of a culture that has given status to stress and exhaustion.
Yeah.
And I saw this in particular. My primary area of focus has been teenagers for so long. And I kept seeing it encroach earlier and earlier to where my junior high students, when I would ask how they are, they'd be like, so busy, I'm so stressed. And for anyone who wasn't, it was like, are you lazy? And so I think part of that survival piece is deconstructing where our work ethic and value of identity comes from,
Yeah.
and to acknowledge that the model of church prior, especially if you've had a long tenured pastor before your current one, is technology has changed so drastically that if we don't know how to put um, space between the actual abilities to be reached, uh, then we're never going to be able to actually pause and know what we need to be well. And the trick is you're 24/7 as a pastor. Like,
Right.
you can't tell somebody who's in crisis or who is dying, hey, I'm so sorry, I'll see you tomorrow morning. That's outside my work hours. And so the note of flexing time is often what churches talk about, but then we don't know how to actually flex time because something else came up. And so I think that's where it comes, the practice of being able to let things drop that are not required in that given week. It can be picked up the next week. It could even be picked up in a couple months. But the ability to assess with your team, whether that's lay leadership, staff, both together, to say, these are the things that need to drop right now. And we're going to name that we're dropping them. We are literally, maybe even dropping is not the right word, because dropping means by accident often.
Right.
We are letting them sit and we are putting them down. And so I think those are the three things that come to mind. Detangling from the wellness culture of I have to purchase something in order to be well, and creating that piece, the ability to not find our value in how stressed and exhausted we are to prove that we're doing enough for our salary or our job retention. And then to acknowledge that there's going to be things we need to put down. Doesn't mean they can't get picked back up. But in order for us to be well in a job that often is 24/7, we have to be able to put things down and be able to name that with each other. So there's not a worry of trust or a worry of transparency. And there's not many models where that is happening across the board. It feels like it's happening in pockets.
You're really right on that. Yeah, this is a very deep kind of topic because, like, I see actually this interesting interplay between those three factors that you're talking about. A lot of it is like, what is your identity? Like, what do you value? And the how you define yourself, the expectations you put on yourself. Like, just that really sad but familiar story of these even young people really valuing themselves. Like, look how stressed I am. Look how busy I am. Like, how virtuous I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And that comes into ministry too, right? Like when pastors are just running around like stressed out, freaking out, like, oh wow, that's a really good pastor, and like, oh, why are we giving those values, like making those identity statements to those people?
Yeah.
And then to give yourself a space to discern, right? To say like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
is this serving my identity and my value,
Mm-hmm.
or is it not? And we often don't have the space to do that.
Yeah.
We like again, we kind of think like taking the space to discern and say like, is this something we should hold on to or release or
Mm-hmm.
drop? Um, Again, that feels like a luxury or something. Like, oh, I
Yeah.
take that. Um,
Yeah.
like this is a very important topic to me, and I want to share later at the end of our episode about like some of the work that I want to begin to do with you for Evergreen. But this is so important to me because I feel like with just the elections that just happened recently, I mean, that's just a classic case of like the overwhelm that I could feel from a lot of my
Yeah.
pastors is like, I have to deal with the results of this myself, but then I've got to share this with the congregation on Sunday, and Sunday's
Yeah.
not going to wait. I've got to
Yeah.
step up. And it just feels like over and over again, there are crises, like some of our churches, like they've been dealing with natural disasters, wildfires,
Yeah.
um, local politics, uh, social justice issues. It can just feel like so much, like I have to process so much. And then I've got to be there to serve other people. And a lot of, I think, what you're talking about, this whole identity, like what we place on ourselves, like what we have to be, I think is a huge burden. So I wonder if you might be able to just help process with me, like, how do you speak to kind of pastors right now? Because I feel like the common theme I'm feeling with a lot of pastors right now is like they're just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Whoa, like how do I do this? How do I do this? Like just overwhelmed. Like, how do you we don't want to give like easy answers of like, just pray or like Jesus is with you. But, how do we do ministry in this in this
Yeah.
time of overwhelm, if you will?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wasn't even in a parish pastor role in the last few weeks, right? Shifted to community spaces and it was still really busy for me. So what that told me is my colleagues who were in parish ministry were
Right.
even more inundated. And
Right.
so one of the things that came in particular during the probably 21, 22 program year when I was in ministry was just this awareness of I don't know where to go right now. And we, as staff, are reading a book, How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it talked about liminal space and
Yeah.
being able to know, like, okay, liminal space can be generative, it can be meaningful, and it can also be a time where you need to just let things settle. And so I would say to pastors, one, you're amazing. First and foremost, like you are amazing. You show up every Sunday and you offer prophetic and pastoral words. You separate without separating how you feel so that you can lead a complex group of people and diverse group of people. So first, you're amazing because I don't think you get told that enough. And it's a weird job that very few fully understand. And so I would say first, encouragement outside of the affirmation that you're awesome and brilliant and just beautiful stardust is find the few people that get how hard it is, get how complicated it is, so that you don't have to add the like 2 to 3 layers of explanation.
Yeah.
Because explaining yourself when you're trying to be understood and feel seen is exhausting because then it just makes us not want to do it. And so that may mean not sharing with your congregation if they don't fully get it. Not from a lack of transparency, but from a lack of from a place of well-being, right? And that's just healthy pastoral practice, right? We don't overshare with our congregations out of care for them. And so I would say find your people that allow you just to be like, today was a dumpster fire and there were no fire extinguishers and it just burned. And I'll start tomorrow. And without having to qualify or justify. And then the next encouragement would be, look at what your community's already been doing. Sometimes when the world feels like it's just spinning on so many different things that you have to address, look at what you've already been doing and lean in. Don't start adding 20 other things because it feels like you need to do all the things to make the world well. Find the things you've already been doing, see if you can expand upon them. And then within your community, if there's something in particular, going local, right? And in times of crisis, going local is often the ways we can feel impact and feel like we're making a difference. And so if there is something local that you're going, I really want to make sure we can address this, then add maybe one thing. But remember, the gospel, I think the gospel is a marathon filled with constant sprints.
Yeah.
And so being mindful that the gospel message, that God is love, that God functions from grace and peace, is the marathon.
Mm.
And you don't have to change your sprint just because of the most recent headline. Stay true to the gifts that you have already discerned are within your community. And if you start to feel a wrestling, like this isn't meeting what we need it to meet, expand. Or maybe even ask, is there somebody already doing that really, really well? And could we partner? And what would that partnership look like? So we're not duplicating services, but we're actually strengthening our base from like community organizing, right? And so those would be the ones I would say.
That's wow, that's really great. And that really relates to the identity piece they were talking about. Like sometimes when there's a crisis, we just want to drop who we are in our identity and just be what we think we should be, you know?
Yeah.
And then we just sort of leave all that God's been creating and establishing and forming in us, and we just drop it all to rise up to think of what our expectation is. And I can't help but feel like God's like, why are you doing this? Like, that's not what I'm calling you to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I like how you use this language of building upon it, is that maybe a crisis does arise something new in us, right? It generates something new. But rather than thinking of like we just have to drop everything and be this rise to the occasion, it's like rising to the occasion is just building the bridge a little further in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes it a lot more manageable and a lot more less
Yeah.
stressful. Um, it feels a lot less guilt-inducing, right? It's like because
Yeah.
I feel like what are we doing here? And we feel useless unless we completely like shed everything. But
Yeah.
I saw a lot of churches that, when the Black Lives Matter movement was really reaching popular culture, a lot of churches quickly adopted it, but they didn't do the work of realizing like, where are you?
Yeah.
Um, and then they kind of did it, and it just ended up being more of a superficial adoption
Mm-hmm.
of it.
Mm-hmm.
And now you talk to them, they're not really moving in it because they realize like we didn't do the work to build out, like you're saying, from where we've been. And I think um, a lot of churches could really take note from the wisdom that you're speaking about here. The other thing I want to circle back to that I thought was interesting was about the wisdom of making space beforehand, for like trusted friends and the encouragement. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that was really interesting. Like the first thing to say is like, you need affirmation, like
Yeah.
100%, because when you're
Yeah.
overwhelmed, I just like it just dawned on me when you're talking, like the wisdom of what you're saying is like, yeah, when you're overwhelmed, you doubt yourself so much, right? Like, what am I
Yeah.
doing? Like, who am I? What's going on? Um, am I really the person to do this? So just having a go-to place that when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I just need a good, safe, empowering space. And it's like if the crisis comes and you don't have it set up yet, it's like it's too late. You can't, it's hard to form it in the midst.
Yeah.
So like having that safe space established, with trusted colleagues beforehand, I think is really powerful. And I wonder, I know it seems like a lot of work at the beginning, but like just how powerful that could be if like, hey, when I'm going through a crisis, I know I have some go-to people that can just kind of carry me through for just a brief moment, catch my breath, and I can get back into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I know for me, a lot of the trusted people were folks I've known since seminary, right? Like these people who, were there through the deconstruction and the rebuilding. And sometimes it's okay to have folks that are distant and close. Um, but no matter what, the people that you can also do the litmus test of, it just feels like there's so many voices telling. I remember uh, previously where I would see a bunch of folks I knew from either undergrad or grad school be like, well, if your pastor's not preaching this on Sunday, get on out of there. And I get what they were saying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I get it. But just like every pastor, like we know that the transformation might be sparked on a Sunday, but it happens Monday through Saturday.
Yeah.
And so just to have those people, whether in person, online, via text, is often how I function with my people of encouragement is just a quick note of your amazing voice memos, whatever it might be, to also remind you that like you know the work, you know your community, and to release that guilt of, oh my gosh, I was planning to preach on this because this is what my community's been going through, but I just had this onslaught of like folks in my feed, whatever feed it might be on social media, telling me I better preach on this on Sunday. So do I pivot? Do I not pivot? And I think that's where having those people to be like, pivot, not pivot. And they're pretty great at being able to go, yeah, it's a pivot moment. Let me know if you need some coffee or whatever it might be, as well as going, remember, you have other avenues. You can mention it midweek. You can send out a special email. You can do a video message. A lot of us got really good at those during COVID.
Right.
And so that would be the other piece, is just like, those are the people who also help you know, do you pivot? Do you stay on course? Because it can feel like you're just constantly swiveling.
Right. And because you're like swiveling, you feel very vulnerable. So just to have that affirmation, like you were saying, like you might have decided in your heart, like I'm 65% about pivoting, like you said, right? So just to
Mm-hmm.
hear someone confirm that you trust, who knows you, who can speak
Yeah.
into it, just really helps a lot, right? Because you
Yeah.
might have just made that pivot anyways, but to just get that affirmation just really helps you with that vulnerable situation, like that vulnerable moment, where like
Yeah, for
doing,
sure.
and just to have a couple of people
Yeah.
like cheering you on doing that. Yeah, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
And I think
So
it helps also be a non-anxious presence,
absolutely, right.
because it allows us to do that like modeling beforehand. I'm going to talk about it with somebody who gets it, who is
Yeah.
safe, so that I can be more grounded in self and be less of an anxious presence.
Yeah, I love that. And like, you get that non-anxious presence from somebody, but then when you receive that, you can now be that for
Mm-hmm.
someone else because you know what that
Right.
felt, how
Mm-hmm.
precious that was. And so it, in theory, it could be this exponential exchange, of
Yeah, exactly.
Um, well, this is a great segue, as I want to have more conversations with you for sure. So like more in the pipeline. But this is a great spot for us to just pause like before we end today, to talk about, you and I are working on sort of a project. We're working out the details still, but this is kind of our desire is that we could have safe spaces for the people who
Yeah.
are doing ministry in Evergreen. And a lot of my passion for this is like just knowing how hard it has been in ministry for me personally,
Yeah.
you know, very close to burnout in other times, and how much we need these safe spaces of grace that we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
And even more so for the Evergreen Association because we're not a geographically regional like Conference of American Baptists. Like we are all over
Yeah.
the place, right? We have a
Yeah.
lot in the Northwest, but even more, in the coast, into the Midwest. You're in Denver. Um, so you could kind of feel like physically isolated. So like, how can we make
Yeah.
sure that you feel connected, that you have someone that can support you, uh,
Mm-hmm.
be that sounding board, that encouragement, that is there for you. Because we definitely need this, especially now more than ever, I think.
Yeah.
Just the way ministry is. There are so many like voices and feeds speaking into our
Yeah.
lives right now that
Yeah.
it's so important that we find like a healthy one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so Reverend Morgan and I are going to share more about this in the time to come, but we're going to present like a first kind of variation of it at our leadership retreat in February. And we'd love to hear your thoughts if you had any ideas about how we could design this
Mm-hmm.
that would best serve you. We're really fortunate to have someone like Reverend Morgan, who is very gifted in imparting wellness and wholeness to others. So I'm really excited for what this could be, and we want to make this with you. And so, if there's any thoughts that you have, please talk to us. So you can reach us at the region, and we'll get you in touch with the right people. So that's my PSA. I just had to throw it in there.
It's a
Um,
great one. Great, great job, Sam.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate Erin Morgan so much. Like she has so much insightful wisdom. Like just brief conversations. She's always like, I feel like whenever I talk to you, Morgan, like there's always like, wow, did she just say something that was like life-changing? I think she did. You know, you
Well,
just
that's
kind of put
mighty
it out there.
kind.
It just comes out very, very naturally, not preachy. It's very real, and it's always
Mm,
profound.
mm,
So we
thank
are
you.
so fortunate to have you in the family of Evergreen pastors.
Thank you.
So I really hope that we can give you like a platform that more people can get to know you. If you're interested in the ministry that she's doing, it's presentnomads.com. Is that right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
No.
and
.com.
so if you are interested in learning more, please visit. And again, thank you for your time. If you like these episodes, please like and subscribe and tell others about it. We'd love to share more of the message of what we're doing here in Evergreen because I think it's a message that is worth telling. So thank you for being a part of it, and we will see you at our next episode. Take care, and thanks again, Morgan.
Thanks, everybody.